Hey Kim, yeah? You remember those pregnancy update videos you were supposed to be doing? Yeah? You really slacked on those, you know? Yeah. We're just gonna let him do his thing. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I gotta film this video, so I've already tried to film this video twice, and I keep like leaving parts out, or like just not liking myself, or one of the videos I cried a lot. Oh, God bless you. So third time's the charm, right? Before I start, I want to say that this entire experience has taught me two things that I've learned so far. One is that God made the human body so strong. I'm so strong. And two, that I just want to take life slow. Like, if it takes me an hour to film this video, then it takes me an hour to film this video, because this one and CharlieSkyy are the most important, and spending time with my family is more important than anything. Also, with a newborn, if you try and go too fast, you're going to forget something, and then that's just going to make your life even harder. Okay, let me just jump into this story. So I'm just going to go through like the whole timeline of events, and then at the end we'll get to like what medically actually went wrong. So he was born on a Friday. That Wednesday, I had actually gone into labor. My contractions were about 5 to 7 minutes apart, and they weren't lasting very long. They didn't hurt very bad. And my midwife just kept telling me, you know, longer, stronger, and closer together. That's what you want. And so I labored for Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday night, we tried to go to sleep, and we couldn't go to sleep because they were so strong. But they still weren't longer. They were about 2 to 3 minutes apart at this point, but they were still only 30 seconds long, and I was trying to get them to be a minute long before I called the midwife. Well, finally, about 3 a.m., 3:30 maybe, I start getting where I'm like, all right, Josh, I think we need to call her. So my midwife gets there about 4 a.m. When she checked me, I was 10 centimeters, which, my bad. So I started pushing. We were trying to get this little man out. So at some point, excuse me. So a midwife shows up, 2 assistants show up, my grandma gets here, eventually CharlieSkyy even gets out of bed. Like, we're having a baby right now. And I knew something was wrong when, first of all, I was having a really hard time, like just even making myself push through a contraction. It felt like it was taking forever to get him out. Like, at some point she said she thought she saw his head, but then he kept retracting back in. I knew something was wrong when she said she had to go to the bathroom, and the assistant that was, I think she was like, you know, typing the iPad. I don't know. I was having a baby, okay? But they both left me. And my midwife comes back, and she puts her hand on my knee, and she says, Kim, we need to go to the hospital. You're losing too much blood. From that moment, it went from this wonderful home birth that I had imagined. I had labored till 10 centimeters at home with really, you know, no major issue other than I didn't really think I was in labor. And at that point, it switched to complete and total chaos. So we had the option to either call an ambulance or just drive, and we felt like it would take longer. The hospital's only 15 minutes away. We felt like it would take longer to get the ambulance here. So we just hopped in the car and went. My midwife called when we were on the way, told them we were coming, and we got to the hospital. That was about 6 a.m. When we got there, people were already in the room, like 6 or 7 people. They're all asking me for all of my information. I remember one lady kept asking me how tall I was, and finally I looked at her and I said, does it matter? I pushed for a little bit longer, and he was born. 8 pounds, 8 ounces. He was born at 8:30 a.m. He was absolutely perfect. He had meconium inside of me, like he took his first poo inside, and that didn't cause him any problems. He was absolutely perfect. I, on the other hand, was not. Come to find out, he honestly should have been born via C-section. Had they done any sort of ultrasound on me when I first got there, they would have been able to see that I was bleeding internally. We'll get to more of that. It's honestly amazing that my body and this baby were able to get it together to get him out of me vaginally. So they get him delivered, and they're telling me I'm still losing too much blood. So my midwife had actually explained this entire process to me because I asked her several times, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? My biggest fear was having to transfer to the hospital. And so she had told me that, you know, your uterus bleeds and you might have to go inside and like massage the uterus. So this is what the OBGYN was doing. She had one hand inside of me and one hand on top of my belly massaging my uterus. My midwife says that she was being quite like aggressive with it. She says she usually does it gentler. What? Say hi to the people. Show them a happy baby. At this point, I'm like screaming in pain. And so the OBGYN says that they're going to transfer me to the OR just so they can knock me out and do these uterus compressions. I resorted to nursing him in hopes of ever getting this video filmed. So at this point, I'm under the impression that the only reason we're transferring to the OR is so that they can put me under anesthesia and do these uterus compressions without it causing me pain. And then the rest of that is kind of a blur. I remember certain pieces. I remember as we're transferring, so it's like her and like 2 nurses and Josh, and we're all transferring up to the OR. And I remember her saying that I'd already lost 4 liters of blood. And I don't really know that I thought that was a lot or not, because I didn't really know how much blood you have in your body. Come to find out, when you're pregnant, you have about 5 to 6 liters. I never had an I'm dying moment. You know, people say that they like dream of this white light or somebody calling them or telling them to go back, and I never had that moment. I had a, oh gosh, this is serious moment when we were on the way up, and I said, I feel like I need to go to sleep. And they were like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And the nurse then was like talking to me the whole time, trying to keep me awake. And I was like, oh man, they say that in movies. I remember going into the OR and a lady in there asking me if I can move. And I told her no, and I heard the OBGYN say no, that I didn't need to move. And then they moved me like onto the operating table. I remember them taking both my arms and they were putting IVs in both sides. And whoever was on this side was asking for a bigger needle. I've actually got a huge scar where that IV went in my hand. So it must have been a big needle. And then I remember the anesthesiologist getting in front of my face, but I couldn't tell you what he looked like. And he told me to take 2 deep breaths, and I don't remember the end of the first. So then I was knocked out. I've never been under anesthesia before. It's terrifying when you wake up, because I was like paralyzed, like I knew I was waking up. I couldn't open my eyes and I couldn't move. My first goal was like just to get my eyes open, and I remember trying to focus on the clock. I heard them say that I was awake. I heard them say to give me some pain medicine. The next thing I realized was that my hands were strapped to the bed, and so then it was pure freak out. I freaked out. I was like banging the edge of the bed. I also realized that I had a ventilator in my throat, which makes you feel like you can't breathe, even though it's clearly breathing for you. And I was straight freaking out, banging my hands on the side of the bed. So a nurse comes over to me, and I don't know how I was communicating with her, but she knew that I wanted the ventilator out. Come to find out, she said that she gave me enough medicine to knock out a horse, and that I wasn't going down. Like, I was pure freaking out. So I think they had wanted me on the ventilator longer, but I ended up being on it. She told me I needed to complete a 20-minute test. I guess they wanted to make sure I was breathing on my own. So after that, they took the ventilator out and they let Josh come back. So I ended up waking up with 4 IVs, including a huge one in my neck that was so big it had to be put in there, and then 2 stitches had to be put over it to keep it in there. Hey. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about you. I had a catheter and I was cut open like a C-section, and then I had this thing inside of my vagina, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called, but it was full of fluid, and it was like holding pressure on my cervix to like keep me from bleeding. You know, like when you put pressure on a wound, it was like doing that on my cervix. So Josh came back, and the first thing that I asked him was, did you name him? Because going into all of that, he still didn't have a name. I'm talking about you. And he said yes. He said that he decided on TheHeir, so that's his name. TheHeir Hamby Lawrence. Yes, that's your name. He still gets called Biscuit more than anything though. And we spent the rest of Friday night in ICU. And I got lots of pain medicine, specifically morphine. So by the next morning, I still hadn't really seen him. I had this awesome nurse who, I was her only patient. And so she was like, I'm taking you down to see your baby today. Because I couldn't get out of the bed. I was strapped to a bunch of stuff. I was still getting blood. And he couldn't come up to ICU. And so she was like, I'm taking your whole bed and everything. We're going to see your baby. And so she did. We strapped up all the machines and everything. She wiped down Clorox the entire bed and all the machines and stuff. And we went down to labor and delivery, and I got to see him for about 4 hours. Baby Heir. The next goal was to get me off of some things. Specifically, they wanted to take out that ball of stuff that I can't remember. It was like full of water. I can't remember what it's called. But they needed to take it out slowly to make sure that I didn't start bleeding again. And they couldn't take me off the catheter or some other IVs until they made sure, also couldn't eat, until they made sure I wasn't going to have to go back into surgery because I started bleeding again. So slowly but surely we get the ball of fluid out. I get taken off the catheter. I finally get to eat. We realized that it has been 48 hours since I had eaten anything. I was finally transferred down to labor and delivery early Sunday morning. It was the greatest thing ever because then I got to, just have him in my room and he didn't have to leave me and we got to be together. And I was worried about our breastfeeding journey because being apart for so long, but it picked up perfectly. And then we finally went home Monday afternoon. So, what actually happened? So, first, my uterus ripped. We don't know when my uterus ripped. It could have been as soon as Wednesday, which is why I was having the prodromal contractions that weren't going anywhere. That's why it took so long to push and get him out. That's why I felt like my body wasn't working. That I physically could not get him out. I was already bleeding internally, is why I was so incredibly hot. I've never been that hot in my entire life. I had no clothes on and they were putting ice chips all over me and I was still felt like I was boiling. And that happens when you're bleeding internally. So there's no way to know when, how, or why my uterus ripped. We then believe in getting him out or the OBGYN doing those compressions that my cervix ripped at some point. And so I ended up being ripped on one side from the top of my uterus to the bottom of my cervix. I ended up losing 11 liters of blood. I ended up getting 29 bags of blood, and I believe, I'm not a doctor, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it was 12 packed red, 12 hemoglobin, and 5 platelets. So I still haven't fully processed everything. I was hoping in making this video that would help me process it. I know that I'm sad at the experience that I had. I wanted to have a home birth and I actually had a very chaotic birth. I'm sad at the thought of never having more kids. I bawl my eyes out anytime I think about Josh waiting 6 hours for me to get out of surgery, not knowing what was going on or if I was okay or if I was going to make it. I'm sad that CharlieSkyy now has this as her experiencing the birth of her brother. I wanted it to be very positive. I find myself being jealous of people who have rough deliveries. I feel guilty thinking that maybe there's something that I could have done to prevent it, even though I know that there's not. Everybody did their job. And then I also feel very thankful. I feel thankful that I'm here. I'm thankful he's here. I'm thankful for my midwife making the right call when she did. I'm thankful to God for saving my life. So I definitely have some PTSD from it. I'm so anxious all the time, but not about things that I used to be anxious about. It's about things that have to do with him. Like earlier today, it was thunderstorming. I'm like terrified. What's the worst that could happen when it's thunderstorming and it's just me and him home alone? And what I think is really interesting is that I'm not depressed. I'm incredibly happy. And that's a new thing for me, to feel all these other emotions but not be depressed. But yet I'm still sad and traumatized and scared. We could have more kids if we wanted to. I would have to have a C-section and I would have to deliver early. My cervix cannot dilate. I cannot go into labor, which means I can never have a home birth. Going to the hospital terrifies me. Having a C-section terrifies me. Something like this happening again terrifies me. And Josh is right there on the same page with me. Like, it was just as traumatizing to him as it was to me. And so I think we've decided, you know, there's only 4 Ninja Turtles. I think that's all I've got. I didn't cry this video, and I don't think I forgot anything. Give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more videos specifically around TheHeir, like maybe monthly updates or something. I've also been thinking about doing a video specific to having a midwife and why I think midwives are so awesome. So leave a comment down below if you'd want to see something like that. Subscribe, and I love you guys. Thanks for sitting through however long this video is, and we will see you next time.